And good evening, everyone. My name is Omar Fritz Eriksson, and I am the Deputy Secretary General of IALA, and I will be chairing this webinar. I can see that we have almost 150 participants, which I think is a record for a webinar. And I welcome you all to this very interesting webinar on the introduction of the new IMO resolution A115832, Guidelines for Vessel Traffic Services, which replaces the old well-known A85720 guideline. At this webinar, we will hear about why and how this change came about, and what actually changed, and the consequences for IALA members and IALA publications. We are trying to disseminate this information as widely as possible, and we will therefore be organizing 2 more webinars on this topic, one in Spanish and one in French. The Spanish webinar will be held on Tuesday, the 24th of February, in a week's time, and the French one is planned for Thursday, the 3rd of March, 2022. You should be informed that we are recording this webinar for future reference and further dissemination of the information given. Please remember to mute your microphones and turn off your video cameras during the presentations, please. If you have any questions to the presenters or the IALA Secretariat, please write them in the webinar chat area. We will try to address as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar, that is, after all the presentations have been given. And we will also stay on for any number of questions. We will close the webinar when we're done, and still be around to answer any further questions that individuals might have. So today we have 3 excellent speakers who are very knowledgeable about all aspects of VTS, as well as this new guideline. Our first speaker today is Monica Sundklev, who is probably well known by most of you since she is the chair of the IALA VTS Committee. Monica works as a senior advisor at the Swedish Transport Agency, where she is responsible for developing, coordinating, and regulating various fields of maritime traffic, including ship reporting and VTS. Monica has a former career as a radio and communication management officer in the Swedish Royal Navy, where she served for 12 years. She also has a long experience from several international arenas beside IALA, such as the IMO and the European Union. Monica has participated in the IALA VTS Committee since 2003, both in the training working group as vice chair, as well as the operations working group as vice chair and chair, before she became the chair of the VTS Committee as a whole in 2018. She has 2 grown-up children, and in her spare time she likes to be creative and paint, mostly with watercolor, but according to her CV, she has also begun blacksmithing recently. So, Monica, you have the floor. Let's hammer it in. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Omar. Yes, that is my spare time, and it's good to have something to focus totally different on what you do during daytime. Hello, everyone. I also wish to welcome you all to this IALA webinar on the new IMO resolution A115832 guidelines for vessel traffic services, and we need to remember that number because it will be used very much in our work. As Omar mentioned, I'm Monica Sundklev, and I'm the chair of the VTS Committee. And I will start by giving you a brief summary of this work. When the 32nd session of IMO Assembly approved the revised guidelines for vessel traffic services on the 15th December 2021, this was the end of a long, thorough and determined revision initiated and prepared by the VTS Committee. I remember that when I started participating in IALA and the VTS Committee in 2003, there were in fact already then a revision of the IMO 857 on the agenda. However, for several years, it was not considered an urgent and compelling need for the resolution to be revised, as it also had to be brought up on the agenda of the Maritime Safety Committee of IMO. But a lot of work and many discussions have been done within the VTS Committee during these years. For example, an IALA VTS strategy paper was finalized in 2015, which resulted in submitting INF paper and other input paper to IMO to inform about IALA's intentions. But the real revision began in March 2016, when VTS 41 commenced the development of an unplanned output proposal for the revision of the resolution. And 2 years after, in February 2018, IALA et al. Submitted a proposal for a new output to MSC 99 to revise the resolution. And I think that Neil will tell you more about the details of this later, but during these years, the VTS Committee arranged special seminar, which was great success and very well attended, as well as established an intersessional correspondence group to work in between the ordinary sessions in order to make faster progress in developing and agreeing on the new text. A final draft of the new VTS guideline was submitted to NCSR 7 in 2020, which was approved by MSC 102, and the rest is history. There has been many well-known and dedicated VTS experts that have contributed to the extensive work that finally resulted in a clear and concise revised guideline for VTS. I'd like to give my sincere appreciation to everyone that has participated in this revision through all these years. But most, I'd like to thank Mr. Neil Trainer from AMSA as the task group leader of this comprehensive work, but also Commodore Barry Goldman of the International Harbour Master Association, who did a tremendous job in preparing many of the VTS documents to be ready whenever IMO approved the new resolution. Last but not least, I'd like to thank IALA Secretariat for all the assistance, and especially Mr. Tom Southall, that has always been there to coordinate and help out independent on the issue. So thank you all very much. It is therefore my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Neil Trainer from AMSA and VTS Committee Secretary Tom Southall to present the changes of the new VTS resolution. First out is Tom. So please, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Monica. I'll just share my screen, if you'll bear with me.
Well, I need to introduce you, Tom.
Okay, over to Omar.
So let me just grab my notes here. So our second speaker, as you have noticed, is Tom Southall. Tom is a fellow of the Royal Institute of Navigation, which was awarded to him in recognition for his contribution to improved vessel traffic service practice, training and development of policy at national and international levels. Tom was the representative of the International Harbour Masters Association to IALA, where he served as a participant and a chair of the VTS Operations Working Group. In his spare time, Tom is not a blacksmith, but he worked at the port of we all our primary work is at IALA, and then we have some other work on the side. And Tom happened to work at the Port of London authorities, where he oversaw their vessel traffic services, which encompasses the UK largest and most diverse waterway, combining a high-profile city centre, port, and coastal sectors. During his time at the Port of London, Tom expanded and sustained a commercial training organization that provided services to the UK VTS providers. In this role, Tom was the principal, lecturer, and examiner who personally awarded over 300 professional qualifications, VTS qualifications. Prior to joining IALA, I'm happy to say that, many of you will know, that now Tom works full-time at the IALA Secretariat. But prior to that, he worked for Australian Maritime Safety Authority as an advisor. He also earlier served in the Merchant Navy as a navigational officer on survey vessels. Now, since Tom and the third speaker will be alternating between them, I will also introduce the third speaker, who is a nail trainer who is employed with the Australian Maritime Safety Authority as principal advisor, vessel traffic services. His major areas of responsibility include managing AMSA's role as the competent authority for VTS, including oversight of the associated regulatory framework, the assessment and appointment of VTS authorities, and the accreditation of VTS training organizations. This language that I just used we will learn more about how that changes actually with this new guideline. It also includes providing strategic advice to AMSA with regard to meeting its responsibilities as the competent authority for VTS in Australia. He is also the chairman of the Australian VTS Advisory Group. So now I think I will hand the floor over to you, Tom, and you can initiate your presentation, which will and you will alternate with Neil for the rest of this webinar. Okay.
Thank you very much, Omar, for your introduction, and Monica for yours. Two introductions. That's going very well so far. As they have both said, I'm IALA Technical Officer with responsibility to the VTS Committee as the Secretary. And I've had the pleasure to work on this task in many different roles over the years as a stakeholder, committee participant, and working group chair, and now as the Secretariat. Today we're going to look at the IMO resolution, its background, the changes and subsequent update of IALA documentation. For those that know me very well, you know that I love history and I occasionally bombard and throw historical facts at you, and so I have got the background to cover, and Neil will discuss the changes and the future. Very exciting stuff. And then finally we'll look briefly at where to find the new updated IALA documentation, and I'll just highlight a particular document that will concern all of you. So without further ado, let's have a look at the context of the high quality framework that surrounds VTS, so we can see exactly where the new resolution sits. At the top, as we're all aware, we've got SOLAS, which provides the overarching international basis for vessel traffic services within Regulation 12, Chapter 5. The regulation introduces the well-known definition, being to contribute to the safety of life at sea, safety and efficiency of navigation, and protection of the marine environment, adjacent shore areas, work sites, and offshore installations from the possible adverse effects of maritime traffic. So very wide-ranging definition there, captures most things. In particular, the regulation places obligations on contracting governments related to assessing the volume of traffic and degree of risk, securing the participation and compliance with the VTS of ships entitled to fly their flag, and in particular, inviting contracting governments planning and implementing a VTS to, wherever possible, follow the guidelines developed by the organisation. So there's the first reference of the resolution, which is entitled Guidelines of VTS. This framework should ideally be like a pyramid, with SOLAS at the top, with only a few paragraphs and increasing detail coming along as we go further down the chain. And then that will ensure that VTS is implemented effectively. We have the technical detail in the IALA Standards, recommendations and guidelines, and they're easy to follow and are written by experts who have first-hand knowledge of the field.
Tom? Sorry, they're complaining in the chat that they are seeing the first slide still. Can you move it around?
Yes, I have. So that's a bit odd. Let me see if I can.
No, just move it and go back and see.
Yeah, there we are.
That triggers it.
This is the slide that I'm on. So with you should have the SOLAS chapter 5 at the top. Is that correct, Omar?
Yes, we are seeing that now. Oh, yeah, I am seeing that at least.
Yeah, that's it. So then we've got all the technical detail in the standards, recommendations and guidelines. So they're easy to use and written by experts at the VTS committee. The resolution is the bridge between SOLAS and the IALA guidance, and it's integral that link is made. So the drivers for change. Now we look at the reasons for revising the previous resolution. The old IMO guidelines on VTS, known as A85720 previously, which trickled off the tongue very nicely. I'm sure A115832 will do so given time, came into effect in 1997 and was developed to provide advice and guidance, crucially at a time when VTS was at its infancy in many parts of the world. And importantly, at the time of publication of the guidelines, the range of IALA recommendations, guidelines and model courses that we take more or less for granted today were quite limited. Since their inception, the guidelines have remained an important instrument for the implementation and operation of a VTS. However, as VTS technology, training and operational experience grew, it became clearer that some elements of the guidelines, which were included at the time in 1997, were limiting the possibility of the continued development of IALA modern standards. This led to the reality of operations outpacing the regulations, and the inability to change them quickly led to inconsistencies worldwide. These constraints had long been recognised by the IALA VTS Committee, who worked over several sessions and, as Monica said, over many years to develop a proposal for a new IMO work programme output on the revision of the guidelines. This proposal was submitted to the IMO MSC Committee, MSC, in 2018 by Australia and some 12 other co-sponsoring member states and organisations, including IALA. Several specific areas were identified in the proposal as being the main drivers for the revision of the guidelines, and you can see them on the screen now. But I'll just highlight two. One was the interpretation and application of the types of service. It's possibly the biggest area of concern was the way in which these three types of service, information, traffic organisation and navigational assistance, were being interpreted. In particular, the revision sought to address the confusion about what types of service there were and when or when not they should be implemented. The next one to highlight is the international recognition of IALA standards. There was a need to recognise the inextricable link between SOLAS and the effective implementation of the standards, and that's where the resolution sits now. Furthermore, the guidelines were reasonably lengthy, providing some relatively in-depth operational guidance on VTS, and much of that's still relevant today, but it can be found within the suite of IALA guidance. A good example of this was probably the most famous recommendation that the VTS committee has, which is or was called V103, now RO103. And in the old resolution, there was 12 pages dedicated to recruitment and training of VTS staff. That's been taken out now as it's already covered within RO103. So that level of technical detail in an IMO resolution has made it difficult to change operational procedures and training and keep everything up to date. Getting the appropriate degree of technical detail at the right level can swiftly improve safety of navigation. Technical detail has therefore been largely removed from the new resolution, and as I said, it's now more a bridge between SOLAS and the IALA standards. But more of these changes will be covered by Neil shortly. The next is a photo, a shameless plug, but one I'm very proud of when we introduced the draft to the IMO NCSR in January 2020, thankfully just before COVID struck, and the draft was agreed by the Maritime Safety Committee later that year, where the guidelines were then passed to the IMO Assembly, and as Monica says, the rest is history. Will be published very soon, I'm sure. So how did we achieve this? Task enjoyed distribution, drawing on the expertise of 44 members from 24 organisations, representing national competent authorities, VTS providers, as they are now known, used to be VTS authorities, other non-governmental organisations and industrial members who participated in 19 meetings of a dedicated correspondence group chaired by Neil Trainer, who will follow me shortly. In drafting this revision, guiding principles were established, as you can see on the screen. In addition, a seminar that Monica referenced earlier on the revision of the guidelines for vessel traffic services was held in 2019 at IALA HQ, and that was attended by 77 members and non-members from 25 countries and 7 other non-governmental organisations. Crucially, about 40% of these people, of the attendees, were not routinely involved in IALA business. And so having them come in and look at the draft and shape it was crucial for it to go to the IMO the following year. It was positively received, and we enjoyed the attendance of many practitioners, harbour masters, pilots, who are really at the centre of our thoughts when revising this. So we went into a very strong position to go to the IMO. So we change. Well, Neil is now going to cover that for us. So Neil, are you on the line in Australia?
Muted.
Are you upside down on the other side of the world, Neil?
Hello, sound check again, please.
Yes, Neil, you're loud and clear.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, well, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Monica and Omar, for the kind introductions, and also, setting the scene for this webinar. I think an excellent job in leading into this very important subject matter. As mentioned, my role today is to provide an overview of the key changes associated with the new resolution. And in doing so, I'd also like to take the opportunity to very briefly look at the opportunities we have looking forward. Now, Tom, I think the process here, just to confirm, I'll ask to go to the next slide.
That's correct, Neil. Yeah, I'm ready and waiting, and so is my 9-year-old, who may press the button for me.
Excellent. A bit of excitement. Excellent. Okay, next. Okay, as an introduction, and Tom did cover some of this, the new resolution describes the IMO's role in regulating, planning and the implementation and operation of VTS, the purpose of VTS. It provides the regulatory and legal framework for VTS, and it also defines the responsibilities of contracting governments, competent authorities, VTS providers and participating ships. It also recognises IALA as an important contributor to the IMO's role and responsibilities relating to VTS. That is, as Tom highlighted, the IALA Standards. And it also recognises international guidance prepared and published by appropriate international organisations. While there are many changes incorporated in the new resolution, I'll now focus briefly on 6 of the key changes. Next. The old resolution was overly prescriptive on the responsibilities for competent authorities, and as they were previously known, VTS authorities, and in many cases, it did not clearly delineate between the competent authority and what we now know as the VTS provider. The new resolution concisely describes these responsibilities. In summary, amongst many other things, the contracting government is responsible for establishing a legal basis for VTS that gives effect to Regulation 5, Chapter 12 of the SOLAS Convention. The competent authority is responsible for establishing a regulatory framework for VTS in accordance with the relevant international conventions and IMO instruments, IALA standards, and national law. That is, it's seen as the regulator. The VTS provider is responsible for ensuring that VTS conforms with the regulatory framework set by the competent authority for providing a vessel traffic service. Next. As Tom mentioned in his presentation before, the old resolution referred to 3 types of service. We all fondly remember those now as information service, traffic organisation service, and navigational assistance service. As many of you will be aware, these were unfortunately were subject and open to interpretation and constant debate. They contributed to confusion to stakeholders, particularly masters of ships navigating in different VTS areas, and there was concern that services were not being declared or delivered globally in a consistent manner. The new resolution has addressed this by removing the concept of types of service altogether and emphasising the purpose of VTS in mitigating the development of unsafe situations through providing timely and relevant information, monitoring and managing ship traffic, and responding to developing unsafe situations. Next. That is, there is now a clear distinction between VTS and what we know as local port services. Next. The old resolution was silent on the ways that a VTS may contribute to the safety of vessel traffic and protection of the environment beyond territorial waters. The new resolution recognises VTS may be established beyond the territorial sea in association with an IMO adopted ship's routing system or mandatory ship reporting system, or to provide information and advice on the basis of voluntary participation. Next. Again, Tom highlighted and introduced this in his presentation. The old resolution did not recognise IALA standards and associated recommendations, guidelines, and model courses. And the guidance and terminology was limiting and complicated the development and modernisation of IALA guidance in a range of areas. The new resolution recognises IALA is an important contributor to IMO's role and responsibilities relating to VTS, and IALA standards and associated recommendations, guidelines, and model courses specifically related to the establishment and operation of VTS. Next. That is, much of the guidance now for establishing and operating VTS is reflected in the IALA standards. Next. The new resolution also provides a framework to respond to change by recognising governments take account of applicable IMO instruments and refer to relevant international guidance published by appropriate international organisations, and future technical and other developments recognised by the IMO relating to VTS. Next. That is, I think it's fair to say that the resolution has been future-proofed to accommodate changing technologies and practices as far as can be reasonably expected. Next. Just to amplify on some of Tom's comments before, Annex 2 of the old resolution referred exclusively to VTS qualification, training and certification. And this was considered to be overly prescriptive. From memory, I think it was over 12 pages. It was considered quite dated and, importantly, in conflict with or constraining the necessary continued development of modern IALA training recommendations, guidelines and model courses. The new resolution recognises IALA standards specifically related to qualifications, training and certification of VTS personnel. Next. That is, qualifications, training and certification are now reflected in the IALA standards. Next. So in summary, the new resolution provides a modern and effective instrument, providing a clear framework to implement VTS globally in a harmonised manner. It clearly defines the purpose of VTS, and in particular, the concept of types of service is no longer with us. It recognises IALA standards, applicable IMO instruments, and international guidance published by appropriate international organisations. As we saw, it has a degree of future-proofing and is not confusing to stakeholders. Next. As I mentioned, I was going to conclude this presentation with just a couple of slides looking forward. I think when we're looking forward from here, we are living in changing times with emerging new technologies and practice. With regards to VTS, we're seeing more VTSs being established globally, existing VTSs expanding their areas, more coastal and/or regional VTSs being established, and the increasing use of VTS beyond the territorial sea. Next. Also, I think it's fair to say that we're increasingly moving to a digital world with developments associated with, for example, e-navigation, sea traffic management, digital communications, data exchange, and of course, the advent of marine autonomous surface ships, to name just a few. Next. So in conclusion, I believe we're living in exciting times. We have emerging technologies and practices that offer great opportunities for efficiency and safety. We also have a modern, effective instrument for VTS. It clearly establishes the role of VTS in mitigating the development of unsafe situations and has a degree of future-proofing to recognising governments should take account of applicable IMO instruments and international guidance prepared and published by appropriate organisations, and recognising IALA standards and associated recommendations, guidelines and model courses. I believe we have a great foundation to now begin rolling up our sleeves and influence what future VTS will be. Thank you very much, and back to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Neil. I will now continue looking at the important work that's happened subsequently following the adoption of the IMO resolution. So in parallel with this work, the VTS Committee have been very busy preparing updates to the recommendations and guidelines relating to VTS and other areas such as risk assessment to give effect to the new IMO guidelines. And as Monica highlighted, this has been led marvellously by Commodore Barry Goldman, and we thank him for that. It would have been difficult for the Secretariat alone to undertake this work, so thank you very much, Barry. That's totaled around 30 plus documents, and this work has now been completed by the IALA Secretariat and can be now found on our website for our stakeholders to download and use immediately. I'll publish the link on the slide in the chat shortly. One particular document to highlight, as Neil just did, is the changes to Guideline 1089, which is now entitled Provision of a VTS. The reason for that is because the new resolution identifies the purpose of a VTS, and you can see them on screen now. So the purpose of a VTS is to provide timely and relevant information, monitor and manage ship traffic, and respond to developing unsafe situations, or as I used to like to call it when I was operational, throwing people a rope when they're in trouble. So what has changed, you might say? Because this sounds exactly the same as the previous services, information, organisation and navigational assistance service. Well, the difference is that these will no longer be optional extras. All VTSs will be assumed to provide a full service with all of these. Either you are a VTS or you just provide information and are a local port service. The new guideline expands on the resolution and explains these purposes. One subtle addition to highlight in the new guideline relates to responding to developing situations. In addition to the existing provision for intervention on request or when observed by the VTS operator, provision has also been made to formalise navigational support as part of a specific local operational procedure, such as a countdown to a critical turn. This guidance is also supported by new documentation relating to communications and operational procedures. Now, I turn also to the future for IALA in general, and you may have heard, I'm sure, about the planned change of status of IALA from an NGO to an IGO. This will be positive for the mariner, giving the IALA standards a boost in their international recognition and their international application to meet IALA's strategic goals. We will become integrated with the work of the IMO, whose predominantly concern is shipping standards, and IALA, whose predominant concern is charting and underwater standards. So we hope to complement these two other organisations and complete the triangle of intergovernmental organisations that provide the framework for all areas of shipping. The ethos of IALA will not change, will still be technical, will still be member-driven organisation, and will still be providing good quality standards for global implementation. We still will be the IALA family that most of you all know and love, although I do point out that most murders do happen in the family, but we are the exception to that rule. The new convention on the International Organisation for Marine Aids to Navigation, otherwise known as the Kuala Lumpur Convention, was concluded and has now been signed by 51 states, of whom you can see on some on the screen right now. and it's so far been ratified by 5. Once there are 30 ratifications or equivalent, IALA will transition from an NGO to an IGO after a 90-day period. You can see a link there to the website where you can follow events around the project, and I'll also publish that in the chat. And lastly, it would be rude not to have a word from our host. At the One Ocean Summit held on the 11th of February, President Emmanuel Macron said, IALA, established in France since 1957, will officially become an international organisation very soon. I congratulate them, and I invite all those who haven't joined yet to do so. And who are we to argue with the President of France? So please be part of the future and go into all the wonderful and exciting stuff that Neil has just covered in his previous slides, and join us to advance maritime safety and efficiency. IALA would like to thank our members for the work undertaken with this mammoth task to get to this point, and other international organisations that represented a broad cross-section of the maritime community. Most importantly for me, being a practitioner both at sea and ashore, that included mariners, masters, pilots, harbour masters and ports and VTS professionals worldwide. In the usual IALA style, I'd like to highlight the collaborative and inclusive approach that has been adopted in the development of the new resolution. And all that is left to say is vive la résolution. And now I would like to open for questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, not exactly. Tom, thank you very much. Because before we go to the questions, I have a bit more on the intergovernmental part. So not only did the president speak warmly about us and our transformation, was it yesterday or the day before, but the parliament, the National Assembly in France actually debated and ratified the convention. I have here, if I can, yeah, this is the relevant minister and the member of the National Assembly who put the thing on the table, and there was a lively debate of people from various parties, and we can see there was a strong representation of women that supported us. So women in maritime is progressing, if you will, or politics. And finally, the chair or the president of the assembly put the matter to a vote, and it was ratified unanimously by all those present. So we are on the road, and if don't worry if your government is not one of the 51 signatures to the convention, you can still accede to the convention, and using the link that Tom gave, you can find more information about how to go about that, or you can contact the IALA Secretariat by email or otherwise to learn more about how your government can be a part of this wonderful future that we are looking forward to. So now we have question time, and there are already a couple of questions in the chat, and also one or two answers. The first question, just to highlight it, was where is it? Whether this new guideline of IMO addresses VTS beyond the limit of territorial waters, and the answer is yes. It essentially states that such a VTS may provide information and advice on the basis of voluntary participation. It also addresses VTS that may be provided with a ship routing system or reporting system under SOLAS Chapter 10, Chapter 5, Regulation 10 and 11. So, and then There is more. Peter, you asked, what was that? Something about harmonized data. It does refer to yeah, it was cooperation between VTSs, which is encouraged. It does refer to harmonized data exchange and information sharing and auto reporting. Also harmonization with ship reporting systems and routing measures. Another question is from Denmark, I think. Will the PowerPoint be available afterwards? Well, the short answer is that this recording will be available on the IALA YouTube channel, so you can relive this as many times as you want. How to clarify from Thailand? How to clarify the roles between coastal station and VTS services? I don't see an answer to that. So the roles between coastal station and VTS services. Neil, is this something for you to reply to?
Sorry, Omar, I was just responding to another one. Could you just repeat the question, please?
We would like to know in Thailand that how we clarify the roles between coastal stations and VTS services.
I think that's something that's quite clearly described in the new resolution 1158, because it quite distinctly, as Tom expanded on, define the purpose of VTS and what a VTS does, and also the obligations for contracting governments for a legislative framework and a regulatory framework for establishing it. And I don't think many coastal stations would have that same obligation as defined in the new resolution, albeit for other purposes. And I think that's part of how it describes that now. And as I mentioned, there's that very clear delineation between what is a VTS and what we know as a local port service. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you. I hope that there was also an answer to the question posed here.
Omar?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just would like to ask again on this one. I mean, coastal station could be so many things, and depending on what you have defined or what you call your station in your country, that could be different. But I think that in this case, coastal station means the radio communication that should be conducted between ship and shore, and have a different, which is also is that what is mentioned? Then it the how to clarify the roles. Of course, yes, I think they definitely should be clarified that the coastal station either has they could have several tasks or several services, of course, but should be very clear if it also includes VTS, vessel traffic services, or only radio communication requirements. Then you also have the
Okay. Okay, thank you for that.
So could I add one to this one? Because I think there's one basic thing behind this that's not been mentioned. There was confusion which was raised, which came out of the old resolution, where there was a statement that said a coastal VTS would normally only provide information. And that has now been removed from the new resolution, because it's quite clear that so-called coastal VTSs very frequently will be carrying out all of the purposes of a VTS, including the organization of traffic within its area of influence and the advice on navigational safety. So the new resolution does not differentiate between a coastal VTS and a port and harbour VTS. It is simply the fact that any VTS will provide the purposes as set out in the new resolution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Barry. There's another question here in the chat before I move on. which talks about the local provider, VTS provider responsibility and the government responsibility. Can you say a couple of words about how responsibility is divided between the actual providers and the government?
Sorry, was that for me?
Yeah. Yes, please.
I'm not entirely clear on the question, to be quite honest. The responsibilities are clearly set out in the resolution, so I'm not sure that I can add much to that. The VTS providers' responsibilities are set out at the operational level, and the governmental responsibilities are set out at the appropriate level as well for both government and competent authorities. So I'm not sure I can add much more to that.
No, it was actually just a clarification on this. Meanwhile, I have received a message saying that sorry, you're mistaken. You're not fluent in French politics and structure. I said they had ratified, but the National Assembly agreed to ratify. Now it has to go to the Senate for the final ratification, but it's almost there. We are on the way, on the road towards an IGO. Now, any other questions? Let me see in the chat. How do existing VTSs who never provided TOS and NAS services now best fulfill these new obligations? Also considering that their stakeholders are not familiar with this. I guess there will be a great need for VTS training to address this. The question states, and are you raising your hand to answer or not, or maybe Neil?
Yeah, just a comment on that question, Omar. I think it's probably fair to say that the delegation at the MSC in approving and adopting the new resolution, and then at Assembly, that most contracting governments and their associated competent authorities and VTS authorities would have been well aware of the changes to the resolution in that 4-year cycle of it being developed, and then also, as highlighted before, the work of IALA in particular, the very successful seminar conducted by IALA leading up to it. So I think I'd be surprised if many places would find the changes to be quite new to them. And my experience has been that most contracting governments, competent authorities and VTS authorities have been aware of it and have been proactive in knowing the change is coming and planning for it. That's not to say that will all happen overnight. Like a lot of this, the IMO resolution was only adopted in December. It may take contracting governments some time, whether that's months or longer, to actually reflect those changes in the national law. So I think to take that question one step further, we will be seeing a bit of a transition both in the legislative and regulatory framework for a lot of contracting governments, and also coming right through to the operational side, if that helps paint a view on it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There are quite a few questions. Yeah.
If I can just expand on that as well.
Over to you, Barry.
Could I comment on this one?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this goes to the very heart of the reason why types of service were removed from the new resolution, and we have set out the purposes of the VTS. And the fact is that if an organisation, be it a port or a coastal state, is going to establish a VTS, it is an extremely expensive outlay, and no one in their right mind is going to provide a VTS that only provides information. If it is truly providing just information, it's a local port service. And this was all, we attempted to clarify this in the version of 1089 that was pushed out in 2012 to point out the fact that any VTS that provided, any previous VTS that provided information is, under the terms of the old resolution even, should have provided a navigational assistance service. And logically, if you're establishing a VTS, it's going to be there to manage traffic. And some people were trying to get away with saying, well, they're managing traffic by providing just information. And that actually is trying to get round the whole purpose of the VTS, which is why the whole concept of issuing types of service caused so much confusion. We've now clearly stated, if you have a VTS, it is providing all of the purposes which are set out there. And therefore, the issue of organizations that were providing just information and calling it a VTS are organizations that weren't doing what was in the IALA guidance anyway. So hopefully, following this new, the resolution simply clarifies policies that most VTSs should have had in place anyway. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, Tom, you look as if you want to say something.
Thanks, Omar. I caught your eye. Yeah, and just so Barry's covered the real world, if you like, the operational part, and I think the question covered the training element. You know, V103 as was, and the model courses, they are expected to cover all three types of service. Your VTS ticket does authorize the operator to carry all three types of service out as was, and now of course it's expected that they will, regardless of whether your VTS authority declared that they were TOS and NAS as well. So the operators initially, if they followed the V103 and the RO103 and the model courses, then they should have had training in all three types of service before, and of course they will do going forward as well. So I think Kevin also mentioned in the chat that of course we have the refresher training, and if that's necessary, then of course that would be an appropriate step to help the VTS operators and supervisors have a refresher and be more ready to deliver traffic organisation or navigational assistance. Hope that helps.
Okay, Neil, you have your hand up still. Is it an old hand? It looks a bit wrinkled.
Thank you, Homer. I think you're correct in your first assumption. My apologies.
Okay. And then I have a hand from Geraldine Delanois, who works at the IALA Worldwide Academy.
Thank you, Omar. I hear that Neil is quite optimistic that competent authorities are well aware of this new guideline. But I think with regards to training and refresher training, there is still a lot to be done to address these new obligations for VTS authorities. As we in the Worldwide Academy travel around the world and we see many examples, I see only few VTS providers organizing refresher training, and many of these countries never delivered in the past TOS or NAS services. So I think there is a lot of work to be done for all these countries to reach international compliance. And I would also want to urge VTS training organizations to put extra energy in delivering refresher training, because there is a great need worldwide for refresher training that also includes these new VTS provisions. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Neil, I think you put your hand up again.
Yes.
Yes.
I did. I'd just like to contribute to Geraldine's comments there. Some people on the webinar may not be aware, but the model course V1031, the VTS operator course, is currently under review. And I understand that part of that is obviously aligning with the new resolution. and the purpose of VTS. So I think, yes, that there are definitely changes and that there is definitely a transition period ahead of us all. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now we have spent the time allocated to this webinar, but I can see that Mr. Stephen Bennett, who also has worked with for the Academy as the Vice Dean for some years. You have the floor, Stephen.
Thank you much indeed, Omar. A very quick question. Will the syllabus of the Level 1 Manager course, Navigation Manager course, which is aimed and targeted at the competent authorities, increase the coverage of VTS and compliance with that? Thank you.
I think I will hand this over to our training manager, education and training manager, Kevin. Can you reply to that?
Yeah, thanks very much, Stephen, for your question. I'll cover a couple of points here while I've got the floor, if I may. In terms of the comment that Stephen raised, yes, the Level 1 8 Navigation Manager course has now been completely updated and revised during the pandemic period, and we are increasing the level of VTS interaction and information within that to help aids to navigation managers have a better understanding of what a VTS can bring, as many countries are determining whether they need a VTS or not, whether one could help them. And the ACE Navigation Manager course, in cooperation with our risk management training, in cooperation with the excellent new VTS guidelines, will clearly give them the answer. In terms of what Geraldine said about training, in principle for qualified VTS operators, if the training was delivered in accordance with the model course, there should be no need for additional training. They should have the knowledge and skill that they need to cope with these changes, subject to minor local updating or refresher training delivered in accordance with V1035, which has provision in it for what we call adaptation training, which is basically if something new happens, then adaptation training should be able to be implemented locally or nationally to deal with that change, and there's a framework in place for that. But I do agree with Geraldine in that there is capacity building work to be done on VTS training worldwide and VTS implementation, and that is something that the Academy is pleased and able to assist with. We have a VTS strategy, and we are able to help out. And I think somebody mentioned about harmonization of training programs. I think as a concept which we're happy to help and guide with, to try and harmonize VTS training on a national or regional basis. And a fantastic success there has been with the ASEAN, where now many countries in that area are operating on very harmonized basis at a very good level, and those countries frankly will be very well equipped to implement these changes with minimal worry and hopefully effort. Is V1031 mandatory, Peter Reid just put up? Well, not mandatory because the IALA standards are not mandatory, but I think they're written in such a way now that you would have a tough job to justify why your VTS operators were not trained to international standards. I think that would be challenging to justify if you're providing such a service, why you are not trained to that standard or why you are not working towards it. And as Kerry's just said in the chat as well, Working Group 3 are doing some frankly fantastic work on updating the model courses, and I think they will be ready soon and will present a big step forward, which I think we're all looking forward to. Sorry, that was a long answer, Omar, but
said Kevin Gregory on behalf of the IALA Worldwide Academy, who is always there to help you. we have gone over time, and there are a lot of good questions in the chat. So I would encourage you to please continue to put questions in the chat, and we will try to make an FAQ or something and put the answers to these questions on our website. I think somebody proposed that, and it's an excellent idea. You will also be able to find refreshed IALA documentation as it becomes available. We are not finished with all of them, but some of them, a lot of them, on the IALA website as usual. I think Monica, who was the first speaker, should be the last speaker as well. Monica, what do you want to say?
Thank you, Omar, and it's been a lovely webinar, really. I do appreciate all the engagement of all, and I counted that we've had a record of 224 participants, maybe even more, because I wasn't looking at this score all the time, but it's been tremendously very well appreciated from our part that this issue is so important to all of you all around the world of this thing. I actually really wanted to also to mention one small issue that hasn't been discussed a lot really, but the question is that can a VTS provider become a competent authority, or the opposite, of course? And I think that it is a rather delicate question. It depends on how your country or your organization has the authority to deal with things, and depending on the structure of where you work. But also we've had the same issue in Sweden, where I previously belonged to the Maritime Inspectorate that at the time was under the umbrella of the Swedish Maritime Administration. Due to these issues that we could not, who was the regulator and who was the provider, then we need to develop a new authority, really. So that was when the Swedish Transport Agency developed in 2009, and all the inspectorate regulators of all different kinds of traffic modes were merged into a new authority, just to separate, because it's very important to have your responsibility, and it's very difficult to wear two hats at the same time. So thank you all, and thank you, Omar, and thanks to everyone for this, and a warm welcome to join next VTS committee session, which will start, I think it's the 30th of March.
Yeah, it's information about the committees can be found on the IALA website. And thank you, Monica, that this great achievement actually was achieved on your watch. Well done and well managed, and congratulations to all of you and me. We will now stop the recording, and